again while I'm back in the studio after my trip to Anacortes. I was actually taking some paintings, 3 of my little paintings, up to a show at the Scott Milo Gallery in Anacortes. It's a show put on by the Plein Washington artists. It's my first time joining, so I'll put a link to the show in the description below. Please take a look. 3 of my paintings are in there. One of the paintings is a plein air painting I did out on the Green Water to Echo Lakes Trail. There's a video for that. And then 2 others that I did here in the studio. One from when I lived in Japan, and one still life that I did here of some satsumas here in the studio. Well, I want to finish this little painting up that I started in Anacortes. I want to finish it up here in the studio. So first, I'll gently scrape down the panel and take off any high ridges when you're painting outside. When you do that first painting, especially if you're moving fast, you can put some thick paint down, and I don't want to paint over thick paint. The ridges will show up later. So I want to scrape that down with a palette knife, just gently, just to take those ridges off. Next, I'll re-oil the painting. I'll take a little bit of refined linseed oil, just a little bit on a clean piece of cloth, like t-shirt cloth, something lint-free. Don't use a paper towel. A paper towel can kind of shred while you're trying to reintroduce the oil into the paint. The point here is just to add a little bit of oil to the paint that's there, especially if it's been a few days. If the painting is still wet, you don't need to worry about it. You can just start again. The painting has dried because it's been a few days, and I want to re-wet, re-oil the painting and then start painting on that. I have a reference photo here. It's the one I used on that day. It still has the lines, the 1/3 lines that I add using the edit function on the iPhone. I've got the painting here mounted on my utility board. I've got the 1/3 line marks noted here as well if I need that for reference. What I want to do is leave the painting as much as possible the way it is, while still capturing the important points of the painting. I've got a center of interest here, which is a clump of blooming flowers. I've got this far coastline here, and these really complicated trees growing out at a slant off this cliff face. I've got a few lines of interest kind of leading you into the main points of interest. This tree is also interesting here. Its trunk is casting dark shadow against the blue of the water, which is interesting. I like this strong diagonal and the fall off with the overlook of the sea below. Got some nice purplish distant hills, some bright clouds. So I've got all that suggested here in the plein air painting, and I want to leave it as much as possible while cleaning it up a bit. Right now it's a little too lightly washed in and a little too rough for my taste. I do like the looseness. I like the flow of the land and the kind of vibrance of the green trees against those distant purple mountains. So I want to try to keep that, but get a little bit more realistic, add just a little bit more detail without overworking it. I have the reference photo and I have the painting that I started, plein air. I'll mix up some colors based on both. I want to keep the theme in the original painting, that kind of cobalt, purple, and vibrant sap green main theme. A little bit of cadmium orange in there as well. So I'm using the same paints as I had that day, the same brands, and even probably most of them from the same tubes, so that the colors stay really consistent. I'm being careful with the lighting. I want the light to hit the palette knife so that I get a true representation of the color against the reference photo. Now the reference photo on my iPad is very bright. It's illuminated. I can't replicate that with paint, so I need to use a little bit of common sense. I'm not going to get the whites as white. But you can see here I've got to lighten this up quite a bit. And in good composition, you want to compress the values. So all the values in the sky, I want to compress them lighter. I want to go a little bit lighter so that all the values in the middle ground and the foreground can be darker. I'll compress those all toward the dark. That gives a more realistic feel to the landscape. Alright, I've got the sky mixed. 3 values right about here. I've got the mountains here. They're all right up in this value range. And I've got some values for the clouds, and they're all down toward this range. You can see that I spent a lot more time mixing up the appropriate colors than I did actually painting the sky. The actual painting of the sky went very fast once I had the colors mixed. Now I'll take a brush with a little bit of mineral spirits and erase back out the clouds. Since they're so white, it'll be easier to repaint the clouds now that I have a smooth background sky. It'll just be easier to erase the clouds and re-expose the white of the panel, and then come back in with the cloud color. It's kind of a quick way, if you want to keep your background sky smooth and clean, to draw in the clouds then. You can also just go wet and blend. That works as well, but I'm not sure which one is easier. I kind of go with my instincts and do what I think is right in the moment on these paintings. Now I have the distant sky and those purple mountains in. Now I'll move into the middle ground mountains. I have a few colors mixed up. So I'm working steadily from back to front and trying to stay with the color theme that I established on site there, even if it doesn't quite match the reference photo. I'm trusting the colors in the painting more than the photo. I'm also trying to compress my values, so the greens in those middle ground hills are going to be just slightly darker than the purple far mountains. I want to preserve my darkest darks and my lightest lights for the foreground. That helps with that illusion of distance. I want the focal point to be this craggy rock face with the flowers blooming on it. Alright, well that's it. I got finished with it. Let me show you the end result. Here's the finished painting. I really tried to keep close to the original color scheme, those colors I saw that day I was out there. And I also tried to keep the brushwork really loose. So there's very few hard edges. There's a few here in my primary center of interest around those flowers. There's a few in my secondary center of interest, this clump of trees here, and third center of interest down here, a few. I want the viewer's eye to kind of move into the painting to these pink flowers, and then maybe up to these trees, and then over to this little band of interesting color on those distant mountains, and then back here, and then back, and just kind of suck you into that scene. And I hope it gives a nice impression of that day. Well, thanks for joining me. As always, it was a pleasure doing this painting, and it's fun to share it with you. So if you like these videos, please like and subscribe. See you on the trail.